Hi there. This is Angelo John Lewis for the Sacred Inclusion Network. If you'd like to know more about us and our work, please visit sacredinclusion.com. Today, it's my honor to be interviewing Michael O'Sullivan, who, among other things, is the founder of an organization called Spire, which we'll talk about. He's also a Jesuit priest, and essentially, he's been involved in the academic study of what spirituality is and its implications for many years now. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Angela. Greetings, everyone.
Now, I've read a little bit about your background and we've talked, and I know
Mm.
that before you got involved in academic spirituality, I'll call it, you
Yeah,
spent quite a lot of time I mean, I guess it's loosely might be called liberation theology. You worked
yeah,
you worked in Peru where lots of things were going on.
in Chile.
In Chile, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, yeah,
So I mean it's quite a leap to move into what you're doing now.
yeah.
But I guess the simplest way to ask this is how did your experience in Chile inform the work that you're doing now?
Right. Well, you see, the reason I went to Chile is because the Chilean refugees had come to Ireland exiled by the Pinochet dictatorship, and I got to know them. And then they actually sang and played music at my ordination to the priesthood. Now, these people were left-wing people, and not necessarily religious or that, but we got on well, and they were very happy to do that at my ordination. I was very happy to have them do it at my ordination. So my initial kind of commitment, if you like, was to the option for the economically poor and the politically persecuted. And I went to Chile because I felt that maybe I could do something over there to help my friends in Ireland who were exiled get back home, as well as trying to work with the people in Chile as well, of course. So I had a liberation theology background, and I suppose I say I also had a feminist theology background, but yeah, it was a bit of a move from all that to the academic study, well, of applied spirituality.
Mm.
And I can explain how that happened because I was in the Department of Systematic Theology and History in the Middletown Institute where I was working. And then I was teaching liberation theology, feminist theology, methods in theology, and so on. But then I had a student during that time who took some courses with me. And when she had her doctorate completed and that and came on the faculty, she decided we needed to set up a Department of Spirituality in the Institute and asked me would I join it because she needed to get some faculty to be part of it. So I was happy to make the lateral move because I had a dean in at the time who wasn't so, I think, so comfortable with liberation of feminist theologies. And I felt, well, maybe it's a good moment to consider moving to this new department. But in doing so, I saw spirituality in a similar vein in some ways to how I saw liberation and feminist theologies, because these theologies were on the side, if you like, of people who were marginalized, not at the center of things. And spirituality as an academic discipline at that time was only developing, really. And I felt it was something on the margins, something on the periphery. And yet a lot of people were interested in it. And perhaps therefore I could also be of service to people like that as somebody who did have a feel for people on the margins and on the periphery. So that's how the transition. But when I was in the Department of Spirituality, then I also continued to teach things like liberation and spirit and feminism as well. So I did try to blend that into the spirituality studies. And I was particularly interested, of course, in applied spirituality, that it would be a discipline that would serve practical purposes for people and make life better for them. We weren't just going to be studying texts in a kind of a very sort of more abstract intellectual way, or the people who were coming to study were people coming from all walks of life. And so we had to see that too, that the spirituality now as an academic discipline had made a democratic turn. It was no longer just for people, say, preparing for priesthood and religious life and that sort of life, but also people who were in the world of counseling and nursing and teaching and so on, and how to kind of connect it into people's lives who were in those sorts of lives. So that appealed to me because as a Jesuit too, Jesuit spirituality tends to give you a very opened out view of things and to be very oriented into the world and to believe that God can be found anywhere and that you don't have to be in a very confined way of looking at things to be religious or spiritual. So it appealed to me to be reaching a wide spectrum of people with what I was going to be doing. And so there were all those elements involved here in it. Yeah.
This is a little bit off the subject, I guess, but I think it's worth bearing in mind. I live in a very secular country, the United States, right?
Okay,
And
right.
I mean, even compared to Ireland, it's a very secular country.
Yeah,
But I think that most people, when they hear Catholicism, they don't hear liberation theology.
yeah,
They hear all the scandal that has been involved.
yeah,
And I know, having been I'll call myself an ex-Catholic. I am an ex-Catholic. I
right.
know the history of Catholicism and the time that you were talking about. Catholicism, and you could say Christianity, but especially Catholicism, was
Yeah.
all about working with the poor, helping the downtrodden people, all these kind of things.
Mm,
And I think that I just think it bears mentioning because that's the truth. That's kind of the
yeah,
heart of the religion in my view.
yeah. Oh, I agree. I think it is. And the question is like, what is authentic Christianity? And what passes for Christianity and Catholicism at times may not actually correspond to what's authentically Christian.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I see the liberation and feminist theologies as very much in line with the authentic spirit of Christianity, serving the poor, serving the dispossessed, serving the marginalized, serving the downtrodden. And so, we have to bring that forward and try and get people to see that this
Yes.
is what's authentic in Christianity. But unfortunately, in the United States at the moment, as you know, you have people like Vance, who's offering a view of Christianity that's quite different. And Christianity is being used to serve the status quo and power and wealth and all that. And I don't think that's authentic Christianity. And a lot of other people don't think it's authentic Christianity. And the Pope, I think, doesn't think it's authentic Christianity.
So tell me about Spire a little bit.
Yeah,
Spirituality Institute of Research, and what do you do?
sure. Well, we created this because, first of all, this Department of Spirituality in the Milltown Institute, well, Milltown Institute had to close down and be sold and all that in 2000. Well, it did it in 2014, but we actually left. Bernadette, who set up the department, myself, we left Milltown Institute 2009. She left in 2008. I left in 2009. And we went to All Hallows College, which was part of Dublin City University. And then that too closed. We continued on our spirituality studies there because they wanted them and that. But then All Hallows College too closed and was sold and is part of DCU now, but the premises is being used for other purposes. And so the next thing was that Southeast Technological University, as it is now, it wanted our work and on our studies and our research and all that. So we joined up with them. But we said, look, we need to create an independent sort of entity that can work with the universities. So when these places close, we can still maybe sail on in some way. But we need a university to be linked with a university to be able to award university degrees. So we deliver MA and PhD studies, run international conferences and so on, and book launches and public lectures Inspires. It's called the Spirituality Institute for Research and Education. Capital S, small p is for spirituality. Capital I is for Inspire. Capital I is for Institute. Capital R is for research. Capital E is for education. So it's an acronym. And so we run these studies in Dublin in the Spire Institute, as it's called, but we work with Dublin with Southeast Technological University to award these degrees and so on, so that they have that standing, the work that people do. Then, yeah. So anyway, that's our objective, that we would make sure that spirituality as an academic discipline in universities and for the professions would survive and continue on, and that we would serve that purpose, working now in this instance with Southeast Technological University to carry that vision forward. And we have a website, and you can visit the website and see a lot of stuff there. And
Yes, I'll be putting it in the web in the show notes.
good, good.
Now, my I guess something I think about a lot is this word spirituality.
Okay,
Because it's a rather amorphous kind of term. It means different things
sure.
to different people.
Yeah,
And we could talk about that, but a kind of a
we could.
microcosm of that is this very powerful concept you have, which is spiritual capital. We're going
Yes,
to be exploring a lot when we have our event on the 20th. Can you,
right.
if you're talking to like a bus driver or something like that,
Yeah.
give
Mm.
me give me your definition as to what you mean by spiritual capital.
Well, I'd say first of all, like spiritual capital is not just financial capital. There is a tendency to think of capital only as money, as finances, that sort of thing. But so the first thing I'd want to say is that we need to reclaim the terms capital to cover more than finance and money and whatever. And so that there can be such a thing as spiritual capital as well as financial capital. So, on the other hand, then regarding spiritual, I think too covers a very wide range of things. It covers what's religious and what's not religious. You know, you can be spiritual and not religious, and you can be spiritual and religious. So, spiritual capital includes religious capital, but it also allows for the fact, of course, that it doesn't have to be confined to religious capital to be spiritual. So you capital because it's a set of resources, you know, that you can draw on, make use of, put into practice, and create benefits from. And what is this kind of capital? Well, it's things like, you know, a commitment to beauty, truth, goodness, and love in life, which can be found in secular and religious contexts and settings and traditions. And we look then to see where are there resources of that kind that serve human dignity, human welfare, and all that in both religious traditions and in other sources. And we try to, you know, make people aware about this and get them to sort of be able to draw on these resources and be able to put them into practice in their lives and the lives of their societies and so on. So that's the idea, really, basically, that there is such a thing as spiritual capital, and it's very wide ranging. And it doesn't mean that you're not religious if you're spiritual. Of course not.
So, breaking it down a little further, I see you have these three different types. You call
Yeah,
it SC1, SC2, SC3. Explain that
right.
to me a little bit.
Yeah, well, SC1, Spiritual Capital 1, I would say, first of all, let me say that Alex Liu developed this four capital theory: material capital, intellectual capital, social capital, and spiritual capital. Now, where I disagree with him is that he says material capital is things like, you know, material goods that are there for to serve human well-being if they're used properly, intellectual and all the things about knowledge and that what it can do for people, social networks, social relationships, and all that is social capital. And spiritual capital he sees as the where there is a commitment to social and human transformation and planetary transformation, but drawing on kind of spiritual and religious resources. But I would see his notion there, spiritual, maybe a little bit too confined. And I would see that I wouldn't compartmentalize material and intellectual and social and spiritual the way perhaps he's doing, if I'm doing him justice. I would see a spiritual dimension in materials, in intellectual knowledge, and in social relationships. And then and so I'm expanding the notion of how to view these entities. And so, for example, SC1 is to do with material capital, but it becomes spiritual capital when it's perceived and utilized, when these resources, material resources, are perceived and utilized in ways they can serve spiritual purposes. And an example of that in my own life was when I was in Chile. We used our material resources to protect people against the Pinochet dictatorship. We hid them and looked after them and all that sort of thing. But here we were using material resources, but for spiritual purposes, because they were spiritual purposes, because to take, for example, liberation theology, the whole idea of the option for the poor is considered to be God's option. And therefore, if you believe in this God, you'll want to kind of, you know, respond to the needs of people in those situations who are economically poor, politically persecuted. So these are spiritual purposes you're serving when you're utilizing your material resources for those purposes. Then SC2 is, I would think, is spiritual capital 2, is when people have experiences in life that really go very deep for them, and they can become a form of capital in the sense that they can draw on these resources ever afterwards to benefit human well-being and planetary well-being now as well. An example of that in my own life was with this, my father one evening when I was about 5, coming in from work and coming to see the three of us, my brother, my sister, and I, how we were at the end of the day, and asking us how we are and all that. We were in bed because we're just young kids. And he asks us all that, and he says, well, he says, have you said your prayers? And I said, well, actually, I said, I've had a toothache today and I haven't really been able to say my prayers. And he could have said, well, Michael, not really, I mean, Christ died for us and that wasn't easy. But you're saying that's having a pain in your tooth was too much for you to say prayers. But he didn't. He took it all very well. He said to me, Michael, he said, God will understand. And I had an immediate experience of God really being a God who cares, who's compassionate, who's understanding, and all that. And this came very deep into me and came into me very spontaneously. And it laid a foundation in my life, really, that I've continued to draw from to this day. For example, when I went to Chile, a factor in my going was because I wanted to mediate this kind God and caring God and compassionate God and loving God to people who were suffering under a Pinochet dictatorship. And so, that's an example of how you can have experiences in early life, maybe, which can go into you very deeply, become a foundation inside yourself, and you draw from them then afterwards going forward. And this is an example of spiritual capital too. And spiritual capital 3, then I would see as the academic study spirituality, but in particular, I see it as being about authentic subjectivity. Because authentic subjectivity, if we self-attend to ourselves, we will discover that there is within us a dynamism for authenticity, which is towards beauty, truth, goodness, and love in life, and that it goes through different operations of consciousness, experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding. And that if we sort of live inside and that movement in ourselves and inside that kind of structure in ourselves when we're engaged in knowing and choosing, we can be led towards what's beautiful, true, good, and loving in situations. And so this is something that's innate. Material capital, that spirit has a spiritual dimension. It's not an innate thing. It's something you add a spiritual dimension to the material. And similarly, say with SC2, the experiences you have in life, they are historical experiences you have. But SC3 is innate. It's something that's in the human being as a human being. We are structured to be this way. And we have then the very way we are in our being, we have a form of spiritual capital to draw from, this authentic subjectivity that functions through calling you to be authentic in terms of trying to really look for what's beautiful, true, good, and loving in life and seek to promote it. And you do that through how you experience, understand, judge, and decide when you're engaged in knowing and choosing. So, I mean, people, when they're engaged in knowing and choosing, they're often engaged in trying to, how do I kind of promote my own interests or power or whatever it would be. But when it's authenticity, that you want to live an authentic life, and you see that as being in terms of doing what's good, living what's true, being what's loving, and all that, then that's what you're really looking for when you're engaging in experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding. And you're being authentic in the measure in which you're actually faithful then to that in yourself.
Mm. Oh, wow. That's a lot. The thing that I'm thinking about is that my view is that the planet right now is in a very materialistic kind of framework. We think about
Sure.
material capital, as you were saying. That's what we
Yeah.
think about when we're talking about value, basically.
Yeah.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about generally. So
Yeah.
your notion is something, the notion that you're advocating and attempting to explain it to simpletons like me is something that is a little bit broader than what I'm going to call materialism.
Yeah.
So the world seems to be, from my point of view, and of course it's hard to really make this judgment inside of it. It seems like it's at a crisis point.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I'm wondering, how can spiritual capital help us, and what can we do as individuals to kind of restore it as a kind of a primary thing that we're all focusing on?
Yeah. Well, if we want to be authentic, it involves, first of all, attending to data at the level of experiencing, and the data is there to be sort of collected and attended to. And then we can get insights into what are the data, what are the insights to be gained by kind of attending to the data, what's it saying, what's the data saying to us. And that's moving into a level of understanding now. So the first level is you're experiencing at the level of attending to data. Then at the level of understanding, you're seeking insight into the data you attended to. And then you're asking yourself, are the insights I've arrived at, the interpretations I've made regarding the data correct or not? And so at this level now I'm moving on to judging, because I'm seeking the truth, not just any interpretation or any kind of insight. And then once I've reached a certain judgment about what I've learned through this process, I'm now moved to ask myself, now what am I going to do about what I've come to know? So seeking consistency between what I do and what I know is then what authenticity would be asking of me then at that point. So regarding the state of the world, we have to gather the data about what the scientists and whoever can tell us what is the state of our world at the ecological level. We have to see what the insights are to be gained regarding that data, what sort of judgments need to be made in the light of the insights we've gained, and then what do we have to do in the light of the knowledge we arrive at through our judgments. So we have to call people to want to do that, and to really want to do that, that the well-being of the world is really the objective. And how do we kind of, through this process, allow ourselves to be guided by that and that vision and purpose, and not by other things like how can I gain from this or whatever. Or if I want fossil fuels because maybe that's what maybe I'm employed in or whatever it would be, we have to ask ourselves, no, but I mean, really, is there something more important here to be attended to? And it is challenging because some people will be more implicated in terms of jobs could be lost if certain industries are closed down. But we have to look and see how do we kind of attend to that as well. And we can't allow ourselves to be kind of held back, if you like, from doing what's best for the overall good of the world by the fact that there are going to be some hard decisions to be taken. But of course, what happens is that politicians are elected, they don't want to lose their seats and they won't go against what their voters want. And we have to keep kind of, how do you call people to conversion, to really want what's best for everybody, no matter what the sacrifices may be and whatever. But unfortunately, as you know, it's very hard to live like that. But I would say that this is what authenticity calls us to
Yeah,
do.
let's talk about this word authenticity, because I
Yeah.
get the spiritual capital piece, and I'm having a little difficulty. I understand what authenticity is. I think I do anyway. But you're making a direct connection to being authentic as human beings into this thing that we're calling spirituality. So um,
Mm.
preach a little bit about that to me, Michael.
Yeah, well, you see, authenticity, sometimes people think authenticity is about being sincere, for example, and it's not about that, because people can be very sincere about what is not actually beautiful, true, good, and loving. Or people can think that, oh, it's about being honest, but it's not about that either, because, what you might be honest about may not actually be true, good, and loving either. You might be honest about what you hold, but what you hold may not be beautiful, true, good, and loving. And similarly, what you do, seeking consistency with what you know, what you have to do in the light of it. Well, if what you know isn't actually true, then seeking consistency in what you do with it won't actually be a good thing to do. So, authenticity for me is about being faithful to the exigencies that are there to be attended to at the level of experiencing, that are there to be sort of followed when you're seeking understanding in terms of asking all the relevant questions. That again, the exigency for authenticity, the level of judging is that I want the truth and not just any kind of view about things. And the exigency for authenticity and in authentic subjectivity then is about seeking to do what is truly good in the light of what I've come to know. So authenticity is a kind of a dynamic process going through those operations of consciousness and calling for fidelity at each of those levels of experiencing, understanding, judging, deciding, in order to get to the outcome that really is for the good.
Hmm. I wrote down this question, which I think will help me anyway, and maybe help the listeners a little bit more too. I think it's a good question. So essentially, you link authentic subjectivity to the inner operations, excuse me, of experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding.
Mm,
So the question is, could you give me a concrete example of how someone might move through these steps in a real life situation and how the process becomes spiritual as opposed to just psychological?
mm. Well, I think you see, authentic subjectivity is a spiritual process. and that the experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding that are involved in being authentic as a human subject are spiritual practices, because being spiritual to me is about getting to what's deepest in life and getting towards what's kind of the ultimate horizon. And you can't get deeper and you can't get further. And so I would think that beauty, truth, goodness, and love are really very deep realities, and we can't really get outside them in the sense that they kind of seem to cover so much. So if you really desire those, then you are desiring what's ultimate, you're desiring what's really deep, what really matters, and you're seeking to live accordingly. And that's being a spiritual person, and the practices that you engage in then to be that way become spiritual practices. So I don't just see this as psychological or philosophical. It's the human spirit and how it is in itself and what it's desiring and what is involved in being faithful to it. And the fact that it goes through these operations of consciousness to mediate us into the world. We don't get there by kind of bypassing our subjectivity and just look out and it's all there. We have to go through this process of the subjective process that's involved, and see where it takes us, and seek and really desire, when we're going through it, what is beautiful, true, good, and loving in life. So yeah, I see this as a spiritual process, therefore.
So I am slightly aware of Ignatian spirituality.
Oh yes, yeah,
Seems that a lot of the process of discernment,
yeah.
there is a direct connection to be able to how to put this stuff into practice. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about it from, your knowledge as a Jesuit. Obviously, you know more about Ignatian spirituality than I'll ever do.
Well, I think one of the good things about Ignatian spirituality is that the God that it sort of speaks about is a God that it believes is to be found in everyone, in everywhere, in every place, and so on. So it has a very expansive God, and it's open to finding God in everyone, everywhere, and so on. So that makes you a very open person, because you're always on the lookout for where God may be present in whoever it is you're with, or whatever it is you're attending to and studying, or whatever it would be. And that makes you a very open and free person inside, because this is where you really stand. You're not standing in fear and insecurity and all that. You're standing with a God whom you believe gives you the courage and the security to be very open and very free and not afraid. Um, so, uh, that means then I think that, you're open to other traditions, you're open to people of no tradition, you believe that
Mm.
there's good to be found everywhere. And so you see everybody through that lens. And then another thing about Ignatian spirituality is the notion of contemplation and action. Before Ignatius and before the Jesuits and that, religious life tended to be viewed more in a contempt that, you either had action or you had contemplation. But Jesuits are contemplatives in action. They bring the whole contemplative spirit into the world of activity. And when we're engaged in very practical situations, we're in there in a contemplative way as well. We bring a contemplative spirit to it, and that's very calming and very centering, and so on. And because you believe that God may be found everywhere and everyone, whenever you're with anybody or in any situation, you're there with that kind of spirit in you, and that makes you very sort of calm and centered and not frightened and fearful and all that. Um, and Well, those are some of the things I'd say about Ignatian spirituality. The other thing I'd say, I suppose, is that it has a great sensitivity to the human. Karl Rahner, for example, would say that he was a very well-known Jesuit theologian in the last century, and he would say that, look, if God created us to know and love, sir, and know and love God, then we must have been created with the capacity to receive God's revelation, relate to it, and respond to it. And the question then is, where in myself can I find that capacity? And so
Mm.
I'm trying to say, I suppose, that the process of authentic subjectivity that's innate to the human person, I think, is a created reality through which God comes to the person and opens them up and opens them out. And the call then is that when you're being faithful to that process in yourself, that very human process, you are actually implicitly being faithful to God, working with you through it. And Ignatian spirituality is very open to that notion that the human, there's more to the human than meets the eye, kind of thing. There's more, there's mystery there, there's depth there, there's profundity there, and we're not just on a more superficial level. We're not just on what we see on the surface. It's not just phenomenology. Um,
You know, we're using the word God here, and as
yeah,
lots of other traditions have different words that they use, and
yeah,
some of them, arguably Buddhism doesn't even use the word God.
right.
So I know that you part of what you do and part of what your institute does is that you communicate with people from other traditions, and I'm
Yes.
wondering as to kind of what that looks like. Do you find easy agreement as to what truth and goodness is, or is this a challenge, or because let's face it, there's some traditions that, and maybe they're not in the deepest traditions in the realm that we're talking about, but they're kind of at war. I mean, I could talk about Islam and Christianity, for example.
Mm. Yeah, but that's why you see, I kind of say, look, I think we need to kind of focus in on authentic subjectivity because it's a common ground. In virtue of being human, which we all are, we have this in us. And if we can kind of meet ourselves there and allow ourselves to journey together through that process, the differences that are there then can be better understood and better appreciated. And people will simply say, "Oh, I see now where you're coming from," or "I can understand that now," or whatever it could be. I think it's a process to kind of enable people to be more dialogical, to be more kind of receptive to each other.
As opposed to
And
coming from a perspective of I am religious, let's say.
yeah, what did you say about
In
I'm a
other
really?
words, so if we're talking about authentic spirituality and
Yeah,
relating on that level,
yeah,
that means that we're not necessarily talking about our beliefs. We're not talking about our religious beliefs or anything like
yeah.
that.
No,
Maybe
but
we'll
they
get
can
to that
come.
in, later, but
Yeah,
that's not fundamentally what we're doing in our
no,
communication.
that's true. But the beliefs can come in because when you're sharing with another person about how the dynamism for authenticity has worked in your life, you can then try and tell them your story, and they can see maybe how certain beliefs came into your life and the influence they may have had for you and so on. And then it makes them kind of understand that better and appreciate that more. And there's a greater capacity then to be together on things. I think the problem very often is that we see each other kind of in ways that are very fixed. Whereas if we can get behind that and sort of say, look, let's start at where we're all together as human beings in this common
Mhm.
ground of authentic subjectivity. Let's go through this process together. You tell me about the things you've attended to that have helped informative for you, the insights you got, the questions you raised, the judgments you came to, the decisions you took. And let me see the intelligibility, if you like, and all that. And I'll share with you my journey and how I got to be where I am and who I am now. And I think out of that, there can be a kind of a process of understanding and connection established. So if we start out with that spirit, and I think that's what's really vital, rather than starting out with, well, I'm damned if I'm going to change here. I believe I know what I hold, and no one's going to change me.
Mm.
It's a totally different spirit.
Yeah, I would like to think that we're all changed by all of our interactions,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, a time can come in dialogues and that and with people where you say, well, it looks like we can't really get further. And we have to say, okay, we just have to agree to differ now. But I think if we start out with a good desire and a good spirit and try and see where we can get to, even if at the end we kind of end up disagreeing, I think even then, though, the disagreement is different.
So let's talk a little practically. You're going to be doing this event for us, which involves spiritual capital. But before we get to that, the thing that we've mostly lasered on in this conversation is the idea of authentic subjectivity. Did I say it
Mm, yes.
Give me some simple things that an ordinary person can do that's trying to discover truth or happiness or whatever. What can an
Mm.
ordinary person do to get to a sense of um, authentic subjective? I'm sorry, I messed it up.
Sure, I think subjectivity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing that has to be done really is to invite people to say, look, have there been times in your life where you've had experiences where, there was some good there, and you had some experience of goodness, say, or whatever it was, either with another person or, I mean, for example, I think, for example, when I had my motorbike accident, I was knocked off my motorbike years ago, and I was just amazed at the number of people who rushed over to see was I okay and all that sort of thing. And these were complete strangers. But it just tells me that in the human being, there is this
Mm,
capacity for
mm,
goodness and caring for people. And so I'd invite people to kind of spend some time going back and seeing, have you had experiences where you can say, I had an experience of goodness here, or
mm,
whatever it was, and say, doesn't this mean like there is more to life than maybe sometimes I think there is? There is goodness in the world. There is goodness in life. I've experienced it. I need to kind of appreciate that more, build on it more, be allow it to have more say for me, because there's so much bad news coming out at times that we can be overwhelmed and kind of we can lose sight of the fact that there's goodness too. So I'd want people to kind of spend time trying to focus in on where was the goodness that you experienced in life, and what did
mm.
it tell you, and what effect did it have for you, and go on from there.
Yeah, that's very good. So I'm wondering, when you see, it's easy to focus on the negative, but at the same time, there are good things happen in the world, and I'm wondering if you can maybe articulate ways in which spiritual capital is working positively in the world that we're facing right now, as opposed to in the work of Michael O'Sullivan. Just
Oh,
kidding.
yes, 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 sure, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think of the people, say, for example, who've tried to go to Israel on in these
Oh
ships
yeah.
to try and bring humanitarian aid, and they're risking themselves in doing so. But they do it because to them it really matters. There are people out there suffering. It's just not good enough that they're not getting greater care. I want to do something about it. So I see this as evidence, really, that there is spiritual capital in these human beings, the goodness, the human dignity, the goodness of humanity, the well-being of people, and all that. Some of them are motivated by religious beliefs, and some are not. But there is this common ground there in all of them. And similarly with the whole ecological crisis that's going on, there are people now working on the sustainable development goals and looking, trying to get also that there has to be internal development goals, that if we're going to realize sustainable development goals for the good of the world, we have to also work on internal development goals in ourselves, because otherwise we won't have the capacity to bring this change about that we seek. Um, and that's where authentic subjectivity comes in very much again, the whole business of internal development goals.
Mm, mm,
The authentic subjectivity in its process and developing it in people is a way of bringing about internal development goals, realizing them, which then can, of course, make for a better world, because the people in the world then are going to be more developed.
mm. Very well said. So
Uh,
your event that we're privileged to have you, we're calling it, what's our title? Spiritual Capital for a World in Crisis.
right.
What do you want people to take out of this event, this hour and a half that we're going to spend together?
Well, I'd like them to certainly take out of it that, look, we are constituted with the dynamism for authenticity in our being, that it is dynamically oriented to beauty, truth, goodness, and love when it functions as it can, and that it goes through a process of experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding to get realized into practice. And that there's great capital, spiritual capital here in that process in ourselves before ever any religious affiliations come into play. We have all this in ourselves, and that we need to kind of really kind of attend to it more, appreciate it more, build on it more, make more of it. And so that's one thing I'd certainly hope that people could kind of come to more. And then I suppose to realize, look, you know there are a lot of people trying to do good in the world, and we may be different, but if we can kind of see, look, where is the good that's going on in different people in different places, and say, like, isn't that great that that's all there, that whatever bad is in the world, it isn't overcoming all that good. And we have to have hope. And without hope, we perish. And we need that hope. And we have to focus there on the experiences of goodness that are there, and take those into account too in what's happening. I mean, like with the Catholic Church and the abuse and all that, as you mentioned, that's very negative. And some people don't really know anything else about the Catholic Church. I'm in the very good fortune of being with people, students and that, who realize there's more to it than that. And and I see how they get transformed through their studies. And they, like, for example, I might talk about Jesus and women in the scripture. I know you don't have to be a believer to study this. You can study it as somebody seeking, wisdom and benefit for your life. And you don't have to believe that Jesus was who Christians claim Jesus was. But we can look at those stories and see how Jesus there functioned in the situation of women and the good he was trying to bring about. And you can say, well, I want to be a person like that as well. Doesn't mean I'm going to become a Christian necessarily, but I can see that Jesus is a good person. I can learn from him. I can try and do in my own time what he was trying to do in his. And this is what I mean by being able to go to sources that offer, these are all sources offering spiritual capital, and you don't have to believe in them in the religious sense, and even to avail of them and benefit from them. So for us to seek
Um,
the resources
yeah.
that way.
Um, this is all wonderful, and I'm looking forward to the event a lot. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't want to leave anything out. Is there anything I didn't ask you, which maybe I should have, or something else you'd like to maybe
Uh,
articulate?
no, I think, I think it's okay. I think we've kind of covered good ground there. Yeah, yeah. Um, and one of the things I'm struck by, and I haven't read it completely, needless to say, it's a big document, but the Pope's recent document about AI, but not really about AI, he's really talking about the human being. And I suppose in many ways that's what I'm doing too, that at the core of everything is the human being, and the kind of human being that the human being is going to make such a difference to everything. And if the human being is one way, that'll be great. Another way won't be good. But I think he's putting this emphasis on, that the human being is at the center, really. And the thing about AI is that sometimes they think you can engineer away limitations. We can get brain transplants, we can get engineered, the whole thing can get engineered to be better. But we have to respect the fact that human beings are limited, and to appreciate and respect and accept human limitation in life. And that human limitation is not necessarily something that we should be doing our best to get rid of completely. So there's only kind of perfect human beings around. Human limitation can be actually even a good thing, because when people are vulnerable, they can be more compassionate as well. And if we all become robots because we become sort of any capacity to be limited or weak is taken out of us, and now all we can do is be strong and all that, well, I think the world would suffer from that too. So I think to keep the realization that imperfection and limitation are part of life and need to be sort of to not try to be engineered away out of existence, which AI perhaps some people would be trying to bring about. Um,
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, environmentalism is fine, but unless we do the human aspect of it, then
yeah,
we're just moving the chairs around in the Titanic, basically.
yeah, yeah.
So we've got to get back to what you're calling authentic subjectivity and authentic spirituality.